What's going on, guys? Welcome to my Node.Js crash course. So I like to revamp these every few years or so. It's been about 3 years since the last Node.js crash course, and I'll go over what I'm going to cover in a few minutes, but I just want to say that this is for all skill levels because we're not using any frameworks like Express, and when you build an app or an API, 99% of the time you use a framework like Express or Fastify or Adonis or something like that, which really makes things easier and gives you the tools to create routes and add middleware and just makes things a lot easier. Now, this video is much more low level, so we'll do things like create a server, explore the HTTP module, as well as other core Node.js modules. So even if you have experience with, say, Node and Express, there's probably going to be some things here that you haven't really worked with. And if you're an absolute beginner, it's a good start to just learn Node by itself and know what it's capable of. All right, so sit back. I would suggest following along just because I think that you can learn a lot more that way, but if you want to just watch, that's fine as well. So we're going to just spend a couple minutes on some slides and then we'll jump right into the code.
Hi guys, let's learn together how to become a remote worker and earn up to $1,000.
Okay, guys, so before we get started, let's define what Node.js actually is. So many absolute beginners think that Node.js is some kind of framework or library or even a language, but it's not. It's a JavaScript runtime, and a runtime is a program or an environment that runs other programs. So we can build JavaScript applications and run them right on your computer or right on the server. Now, Node.js was built with C++, and it uses the powerful V8 JavaScript engine that's also used with the Google Chrome web browser. Node.js can be used for a lot of things, but it's mostly used for developing server-side and networking applications, APIs, microservices. It essentially allows you to use JavaScript to write server-side code and do a lot of the same things you would do with Python or PHP or C# and other server-side languages. Now, traditionally, JavaScript was only used on the client side in the web browser to do things like form validation, animation, small stuff like that. But with Node.js, JavaScript has really become a truly powerful full-stack language. And again, you can do a lot of the same things you can do with other server-side languages. And there are actually other JavaScript runtimes such as Dino and Bun.js, and those are really cool to explore. They're much newer technologies, but they don't really have a space in the industry yet. So I would definitely suggest starting with Node.js. I would never suggest that someone start with something like Bun.js or Dino, just because it's so new, and you're most likely not going to find jobs using those technologies just yet. There's also not really a large community or support for them either. So Node.js is very fast and scalable due to its architecture and the V8 engine. It's also pretty popular. I think it's something like 6.3 million websites use Node.js, and it's used by companies like Netflix, Uber, LinkedIn, and in addition to really large companies, Node is also a really popular option for startups and smaller projects as well. Now, I just want to quickly go over what we're going to cover in this course and kind of the order we're going to do it in. So, of course, we're talking about now what Node.js is. I'll talk a little bit about how it works under the hood as well. We're going to install it, set up a project, set up the package.json, which is a kind of like a manifest file. We're going to look at some custom modules, which are basically just files that we can create, and we can import and export functions and data from those files to and from those files. And there's really two module systems that we can use. There's CommonJS, which is kind of Node.js's native system, and then you can also use ES modules, which is the import syntax that you use with React, Vue, and all the front-end JavaScript stuff. So I'm going to show you both, but ultimately we're going to stick with ES modules. That's just what I prefer. It's more modern. Now, when it comes to the core modules that Node includes, I think the HTTP module is one of the most important to kind of understand when you're getting started. And this is what allows you to create a server and accept requests and give responses. So a big part of this tutorial will be using the HTTP module. Now, in real life, like I said earlier, you'd probably use something like Express, which is a web framework that makes things much easier. And I'm also going to be revamping my Express crash course as well. But Express uses or sits on top of the HTTP module. So it's good to know how this works and how to accept requests, how to work with them, how to send responses back, send JSON back, and deal with HTTP headers and methods and all that stuff. So that's really what we're going to cover in this course, or in that part of the course. We're even going to look at some custom middleware, which are functions that sit between incoming requests and outgoing responses. Now, when it comes to some of the other core modules, we're going to be going over those in the second part of the course. So the file system module, path module, URL, events, things like that. So I'll cover the basics of all those as well. Now, one common mistake that I see people do is jump to Node.js too quickly. Before learning Node.js, you should have a good understanding of JavaScript. So, of course, you should know all the fundamentals, variables, functions, loops, objects, classes. You should have a good understanding of that stuff, most definitely. Now, I'd also suggest that you understand asynchronous programming, so you should know things like callbacks, promises, the async await syntax. Chances are you'll be building web applications and JSON APIs with Node.js, so you should understand how HTTP works, the request response cycle. You should know about HTTP methods like get, post, put, delete. You should know the common status codes, 200, 404, 500, things like that. And you will be learning more about this stuff as you learn about Node.js, and even in this very video. Now, you probably are coming from front-end JavaScript, so you've probably worked with APIs, JSON APIs. You've probably consumed them. Well, now you're going to be creating them most likely. So it helps if you already have a basic understanding of how they work. Like I said, HTTP methods and status codes and all that. And then NPM, the Node Package Manager, you probably have some experience with. I mean, if you're using React or any front-end framework, you're usually installing that stuff with NPM, so you probably have an idea. But you will also learn about NPM and package.json and stuff in this video. All right, so let's talk a little bit about how Node.js works. And I'm not going to go too deep into this because I want this to be practical and easily digestible, but you should have a basic idea of how Node works under the hood. So as I said, Node is built on top of the V8 JavaScript engine, which is the same engine that powers Google Chrome. Other browsers have their own engines, like Firefox has SpiderMonkey, Safari has JavaScript Core. The V8 engine is written in C++, and it's what takes your JavaScript code and converts it into machine code so that your computer can understand. And Node has taken this engine and extended it to work on the server side. Now, Node.js is what we call non-blocking, which means that it doesn't wait around for I/O operations, which are input-output operations. And those are things like network calls, file system operations, database operations. And instead of blocking the execution of code while waiting for these things to happen or these things to complete, Node.js uses events and callbacks, and this allows it to handle thousands of connections at the same time. And this is why Node.js is so fast and efficient. Now, in Node.js, there's a single main thread that executes your JavaScript code, and you can think of a thread as a set of instructions that your computer executes. And in a single-threaded environment, there's only one set of its instructions that are executed at a time. This is different from multi-threaded environments where you have multiple threads that can execute different parts of your code simultaneously. So Node.js uses something called the event loop, which is a mechanism that allows Node to perform non-blocking I/O operations. And when you make a network request, for example, Node.js doesn't wait for that request to complete. Instead, it continues to execute the rest of your code. And when that request does complete, it triggers a callback, which is then added to the event queue. And the event loop picks up the callback and then executes it. So I know this is a little tough to understand. So the analogy that I like to kind of describe and what helped me is to imagine the event loop as one of those giant revolving doors at the mall or something like that. And each person represents a task or operation initiated. And as a person walks into the building that's initiating a task, instead of waiting for them to complete their business inside the mall, we'll call that the task execution, Node.js keeps the revolving door spinning signifying the event loop. Now, as each person finishes their task in the building, they exit the revolving door, representing the completion of their task, and the event loop or the door keeps the flow going, handling incoming tasks and ensuring that the program's execution remains uninterrupted. So when a callback executes in Node.js, it's akin to a person executing that revolving door, and it would mark the completion of their task. And while the event loop keeps processing and flowing, it waits for others to enter. Now, I don't know if that analogy helps or if it just confused you more, but that's kind of how it works. And it's not that important for you as a beginner to understand how everything works under the hood right now. It's more learning the syntax and how to handle incoming requests and send responses and things like that. Now, as far as what Node is used for, it's used for a lot of things. So, of course, building APIs, and this could be RESTful APIs, GraphQL APIs, server-rendered apps. So, of course, we can serve JSON data, but we can also serve HTML pages, and we can use different template engines like EJS, Mustache. There's all types of engines that you can use to serve HTML pages, dynamic pages. It's also great for real-time applications like chat, real-time games, collaboration tools, things like that. Microservices. So microservices are small independent services that work together. I actually just did a crash course on microservices if you're interested. Command line tools. You can build CLIs, command line interfaces. Bots. So for example, you could build a Twitter bot or a bot for Slack or Discord. Web scraping, Node.js is good for web scraping, and there's a few different frameworks that you can use for that as well. And then web servers, of course, and it could be a sophisticated web server handling complex routing and serving dynamic content, or just a simple static file server. What Node.js is not great for is CPU-intensive applications. So as we talked about, Node.js is single-threaded and uses an event loop, which makes it great for I/O operations, but not so great for CPU-intensive operations. So if you're doing a lot of heavy computation and things like that, you probably want to look more into like Python, Ruby, Java, and other server-side languages. But that's it for the slides. Now what I want to do is jump in. We'll talk a little bit about installation, which is very simple, and we'll start to set up a project, and then we'll go from there. All right, guys, so this is the official Node.js website, nodejs.org. And as far as installation goes, it's very simple. If you're on Windows or Mac, you can just simply go to the site, click download the LTS, which is the long-term support version. You can download the absolute latest version if you want. There might be some extra features there, but I usually suggest using the LTS. And then you can just run that file. I already have it installed in this machine, so I'm not going to run it, but it's just like any other installer. Just go through it, and then Node should be installed. Now, if you're on Mac, you can also use Homebrew, and of course, if you're on Linux, you can use your, whatever the package manager for your distro is, and get it installed that way. And then you just want to open up a terminal or a command line prompt and just do node -- version, and that will show you the version that's installed. And Node.js comes with NPM, which is the Node Package Manager, which you can use to install third-party packages, and you can just make sure that that's installed as well. Now, Node.js does come with a REPL, which stands for Read Eval Print Loop, and it's basically just a command line environment to run JavaScript, and you can start that by just typing Node and then enter. So from here, I can type in any JavaScript that I want. Now, you're probably not going to use this much, but it is a nice way to kind of test out code and just experiment with JavaScript and not have to do it through a file, through the browser or anything like that. So I'll just give you some examples. We can do a console.log. And obviously when you're doing front-end JavaScript, the console pertains to the console in the browser. This pertains to the terminal. So if we do console log hello world and run that, it's going to just
Mau cuan dari trading? Bisa. Nih, pelajarin dulu dasarnya. Gimana candlestick-nya?
spit it out to the terminal, to the console, and undefined just means that there's nothing being returned from this line. Now you can also create variables, like we can say name John, and obviously I get undefined because that doesn't actually return anything. If I do a console.log of the variable of name, then I should see John. You can also create functions, like I could create, we'll use a one-line arrow function here called greet, and we'll just return, let's just return, we can put some backticks in here and say hello, and then put our name variable, and then we can call that function, and we get hello John. All right, so like I said, you're probably not going to use this much, but it is there for you to test out code or whatever you want. So you can just do Control or Command C to get out of that. Now from here, I just want to create a folder to work in. You can either use your Explorer or File Manager, or you can use the terminal and just do make directory. And I'm going to call this Node.Js-crash-2024. Okay, and then I'm just going to CD into that folder, and then from there I'm going to open my text editor with code dot. If you're not using VS Code, just open that folder up in whatever editor you're using. So close that, and now I'm just going to use the integrated terminal for any commands that I want to run. Now, 99% of the time, the first thing you're going to do when you're starting a new Node.js project is create a package.json file. So we can do that by using an npm command. So in the terminal, we can say npm init. And there's going to be some questions asked, and if you wanted to skip those questions, you could just add -y, but I'm going to go through those just so you can see what they are. So the package name, whatever's in parentheses, is the default, so you can just hit enter to accept that. Version, description, I'm just going to say Node.js crash course code. And then the entry point, which is like your main file, index.js, that's fine. And then you can just enter through this stuff. If you want, you can put your own name, and then for license, I usually put MIT. And then enter, and that will create a package.json file for you. So you never have to create this manually. And this has, basically the stuff that we just answered. And then it also has scripts. So basically you can create what are called npm scripts to do certain things like start your server, stop it, run tests, all kinds of stuff. And I'll get more into that a little later. So now that we have a package.json file, the next thing you would usually do is create an entry point, which is your main file, the file you're going to run. Usually when dealing with Node.js, or any language really, you're going to have a project structure with files and folders, and usually you have one entry point, and the other stuff is just imported into other files. So let's create a file. I'm going to call it index.js, and you might see this as app.js or server.js. I usually like to use index. Now from here, we can just type JavaScript. So I can do a console log. Let's just say hello world. Now, since we have Node.js installed on this machine, I can run this file from my terminal by saying node and then the name of the file, which is index.js. Make sure you're in the correct directory, and you'll see hello world printed to the console. And you don't even have to do the .js. We could just do index, which is the name of the file, and then that runs it as well. Okay, and you can put any JavaScript that you want in here. Okay, now there are some differences. So for instance, when you're in the browser environment, and I'm assuming that a lot of you are coming from the front end, so in the browser you have this window object, right? If I were to run it, you'll see I get an error. It says window is not defined. That's because there's no browser, so there is no window object. Now there is something called global, which is similar, but it obviously doesn't represent a browser window. It represents just the global object, and you can see that there's a bunch of stuff on this as well, such as set timeout, set interval. These are actually not part of JavaScript. They're part of the web API in the browser, but they're also available in Node.js because of this global object. All right, now there's also not a document object, so there's no DOM, right, because there's no document. The document pertains to the browser and its environment, so that's not available, but there is a process object. So that pertains to the current process that's being run. So you can see there's a bunch of stuff on here that you can get as well. You can get environment variables, things like that, and I'll talk more about the process later. All right, so yeah, so those are basically, it's just the environment is different, but as far as the JavaScript language goes, it's all the same. And that's what's great about building full stack when you're using like React or Vue or anything like that. You're writing the same language on the front end as you are on the back end, which is nice, rather than doing JavaScript on the front end and then Python or PHP or something on the back end. which is also fine, but I like to have it all, all in one. Now I want to talk about modules. So usually, like I said, you'll have a structure of files. So let's go ahead and create a utils.js file. And let's say that this is just a file that has random functions that we want to use around our site. So I'll create a function. Let's call this generate random number. And that's exactly what it's going to do. So we'll make it really simple. We'll just say math.floor. So we're going to round down math.random, and we'll multiply that by 100 and then add 1. So it's basically going to give us a number between 1 and 100. Now I want to be able to use this function in other files. So in order to do that, we have to export it. Now, the system that I'm using right now is called CommonJS. It's like the native Node.js module system. And I'm going to show you how to do it with that first, and then I'm going to show you how we can switch to ES modules, which is the more modern syntax that you use with front-end frameworks. So with CommonJS, what we would do is say module.exports, and whenever we want to export, we set this equal to. So let's say generate random number. We don't use the parentheses here. Now, since I exported it, I can import it where I want. So let's import it into this file. So to do that, we'll say const and then generate random number, and then we use the require syntax. That's CommonJS. And then we want to do // which is the current directory, and then utils. And with CommonJS, we don't have to do the .js at the end. So now I should be able to, let's do a console log. We'll put some backticks, and we'll say random number, and then we should be able to use that function. So now if we run this file with node index, I get random number 67, random number 79, so I can use other functions from other files. And it's not just functions that you can export. You can also export objects or arrays and other types of data. Now, this is what we call a default export because it's one thing being exported. However, you might have other functions that you want to export. So let's create another one. We'll call this Celsius to Fahrenheit. And let's say it takes in a Celsius argument, and then let's see, the formula for that is, let's see, that whatever that Celsius value is, multiply by 9, and then divide that by 5, and add 32. So that should give us the Fahrenheit. Now, I want to export both of these, so what I need to do is export an object like this and put both functions in there, like that. And then when I import it, I'm going to wrap this in curly braces, and then I can just go ahead and import both. And then I'll come down here, we'll do a console log with backticks. We'll say Celsius to Fahrenheit, I don't know if I spelled that right. And then we should be able to run that function, and we'll pass in, let's pass in 32. I'm sorry, we'll pass in 0, Celsius to Fahrenheit. So that should give us 32. All right, so you can see right here, Celsius to Fahrenheit 32. So that's like a quick crash course on CommonJS syntax. Now I want to show you how to use ES modules, which is the import-export syntax. Now there's one thing we have to do in order for this to work, and that is in the package.json file, we have to add in here type, and then we're going to set that. You see we have two options here, CommonJS, which is the default, and then module. So we just have to set type to module, and then we can use it. So let's create another file. I'm just going to call this postcontroller.js. So we'll say we're building some kind of blog API or blog app, and this will be where we can fetch our posts and stuff. Now, usually you'd have some kind of database. You would use a third-party package like SQLize or Mongoose to interact with your database, but we're just going to create some hard-coded posts. So we'll have an array, an object, we'll just have an ID, and a title. So we'll just say post 1, and then we'll copy that down, and this will be post 2, ID 2. All right, so let's say we want to have a function, and you can use arrow functions as well, of course. So we'll say get posts, and we'll set that to an arrow, and then we'll just return the post. So very simple. And then to export, there's a few options. We can do this. We can simply just put export before it. And then in our index.js, I'm just going to comment this stuff out. You can just ignore that now. So to import, we can do this. And it's not exported as default, so we need to have these curly braces around get posts. Now, with ES modules, when you're using it with Node.js, we do have to add the .js. At least I think we still have to. Let me just run that. Yeah, so you see how we get an error? So cannot find module. Did you mean to import postcontroller.js? So if I do that and I run the file, nothing's going to happen because there's nothing here, but I don't get the error. So I should be able to use this now. So we'll come down here and let's just do a console log of get posts. And now we'll run it and you can see it prints the post. Now, another way that you can export is at the bottom. So if you don't do it here, get rid of that, we can just do export and then as an object, get posts. We can put that in there like that and it should work again. Now, you might want to export it as default. So, for example, when you build a React component in the front end, you usually export that as default because it's usually the only thing being exported from that file. So to do it as default, you would get rid of these curly braces and you would say export default get posts like that. Now, if I want to use this, I have to bring it in without the curly braces. So that should work, and it does. And you can even export one thing as default and then other things as not default. So let's say we have actually we're going to use export here. So let's say we want to export another function called get post length. And we'll set that to an arrow function and we'll just return post.length. Okay, so that's going to export get post as default and get post length as just regular. So here I can put a comma and then have my curly braces and get post length. And I should be able to, let's console log and say post length and then get post length. If we run that, there we go, post length 2. All right, so that is using import and export for both CommonJS and ES modules. I prefer to use ES modules, so we're going to just use that for the rest of this. So like I said, I want to jump into the HTTP module and creating a server and dealing with request response. I mean, that's kind of the majority of what you're probably going to be doing with Node.js. Now, like I said a few times, you're going to do this most likely with a framework such as Express or Koa or Fastify. There's tons of great frameworks out there. But I think that it's good to know kind of what's going on under the hood. So let's close up index.js and let's create, and I'm just creating these files just so you have them. I'm going to put them in a repository just so you have them for documentation. But let's create a server.js file, and that will be our new entry point for what we're doing now. And we're going to import the HTTP module. So let's say import HTTP from HTTP. Okay, no / or anything like that because it's not a file that we're including. It's a module that's included with Node.js. So we want to create a server, and there's a method called create server that we can use. So we're going to create a variable called server, and then we want to set that to HTTP, and then there's, like I said, a method called create server, and then that's going to take in a function. It doesn't have to be an arrow. It can be just a regular function if you want. Now this will have a request, so REQ, and a response, RES. And these two objects are really important, and we're going to use different methods and properties from them. But all I want this to do is basically just send some text to the client. So we're going to take our response object, and there's a write on that. And you can see right here, the write method writes some data to the stream and calls the supplied callback once that data has fully been handled. If there's an error, then the callback will be called with the error. And I mean, you can read all this stuff if you want to really get into it, but we're just sending some text to the client. In our case, it's going to be the browser. So let's just write hello world. And then we want to end the response with res.end. Now, like I said, and I'm probably going to say this a bunch of more times, when you're using a framework like Express, you don't have a responsibility to end the stream. It does it automatic, all right? Just like you don't have to manually set some header values and the content type and all that stuff. And if you take the Express crash course after this, I think that's a good idea because you can kind of compare the two. So this by itself won't do anything. We have to listen on a port. So we're going to take that server variable and then we're going to call the listen method. And that's going to take in a port. I usually use 5,000 for server-side stuff, but that's actually being taken up on this machine, so I'm going to use 8,000. And then you can also pass in a function so you can just do something after it connects. So we'll just do a console log and we'll say server running on port. And we could even make these backticks. Yeah, let's do that. Let's make these backticks and then we'll actually create a variable for the port. So we'll say on port and then we'll put that variable in here. And for now we'll set the variable up at the top here. Let's say const port and we'll set that to 8,000. All right, so now we should be able to run our server. It's a very, very simple server, but we should be able to run node server. And now you see server running on port 8,000 and it takes up the terminal. I can't put any more commands in here unless I shut down the server. Now let's open up the browser and I'm going to go to...
Hi guys, so if you are from Indonesia and if you want to work remotely and earn...
not 5,000, 8,000. And we should see hello world. So let's go back to our code and we can even get rid of this res.write because the end method, you can send a response body here. So we can actually put our hello world in there and we could get rid of this and we should get the same thing. Now you do have to restart the server. So let's do that and let's reload and yeah, we get the same thing. Now we can also set header values such as content type, or you might have like an authorization key or something like that. So we can take our response object and there's a set header method. And let's change the content type. So we'll say content-type. And then the second argument we pass in is the type we want. Let's say text/HTML. And then down here, let's wrap this hello world in an H1 and restart the server. And then if we come back here, you'll see it's now in H1. And if we open up our DevTools, go to the Network tab and reload, click on this local host, you can see it's a GET request. It's going to be a 200 response by default. And you can see content type is text HTML. Now I could change that if I did like text plain, that's for plain text, reload the server, come back here, and now it's actually showing me the H1 tags. It's not parsing the HTML because the content type is explicitly set to this text plain. Now there might be cases where you want to change the status, right? If you want to send back like a not found page, you could change it to like a 404. So we can do that. Let's go, actually let's put it back to HTML. And then here let's say status code. And we're going to set that equal to 404. And then maybe you'd say like not found or something like that. But let's just stop the server, reload it, and come back here, reload the page. And now down here, notice that it's red, the local host, and it has a status of 404. And we could actually shorten this up, right? So we could do this instead of having two separate lines here, we can use the write head method. So we can say write head, and you can see here it sends a response header to the request, the status code, so it allows you to send the status code and things like the content type, so headers. So let's wrap in here, let's say we want to send, let's do a 500, and then we'll set the content type, So here we can have an object with different header values. So we'll say content dash type, and we'll set that to, let's set it to application slash JSON. And then we can actually send JSON data here. So let's say JSON.stringify, and I'm going to talk more about APIs and JSON data, but just to show you, you can put an object in here. We'll say message server error and restart. Okay, so now if I reload this page, now we get this JSON message server error, and you can see it's a 500. Now, before we move further with our server and writing some more code in here, I want to just talk about npm scripts and npm modules, because I want to install one called NodeMon, because it's kind of a pain in the ass to keep restarting the server. So let's create a script first to run this, because right now we're running node and then the name of the file. But if we go to our package.json, we can add a script in here called start. We can replace the test, that's fine, we're not using that. And then let's have that run node server or server.js. So now what we can do is come down here and we can now run npm start, and that will do the same thing. Okay, so that'll start our server. Now, if you use something else other than start or test, like let's say we use dev, then you actually have to do npm run dev, not just npm dev. So keep that in mind. And dev is really common because a lot of times you'll have your development environment and then you'll have your production environment. So we'll just put that back to start for now. So next thing I want to do is install NodeMon. And when you install something using npm, right? So let me just clear this up. So if you do npm install NodeMon, I'm not going to run this just yet, but what it's going to do is it's going to install it from the npm registry or npm.js registry. So you can actually go to the website if you want. So right here, and search for NodeMon or any package. And this will show you the page, and you can see the install. You can also use just I to install. And then the repository, so you have the GitHub, the home page, it shows you the weekly downloads, version, license, all that stuff, along with the documentation, so all the usage. So these pages are very, very helpful, and they usually have kind of the same stuff on the GitHub page as well. As you can see, it's like the same exact docs. So I want to install this because I don't want to keep restarting the server, but I do want to install it as a dev dependency, which are dependencies that are not needed for your production environment. So to do that, you just need to add the -D flag. Okay, I'm just going to close up the package.json because it's actually going to update. So let's run this, npm install, or you could even do just npm i-d NodeMon.
Learn valuable business and IT skills in your own time and at your own pace with
Okay, so what that's going to do is a couple things. It's going to create a Node modules folder, since we didn't have one because we haven't installed any packages. But as soon as you install a package, it creates this folder. And if you look in it, there's a crap load of stuff here. And even though we only installed NodeMon, that particular package, just like every package, has a bunch of dependencies. And then those dependencies have dependencies. And that's why you get this big Node modules folder. All right, the other thing it did is in the package.json, you can see now we have this dev dependencies object with the NodeMon and the version. Okay, so if we installed it without the -D, just a regular dependency, then it would be in the dependencies object. So you're going to have a dependencies object if you install something normally. And then another thing that happened is this package-lock.json file was created, and this has the entire dependency tree with all versions and everything. You don't have to do anything with this file. All right. Now, when you push your code to GitHub, you never want to push the Node modules folder. Okay, you don't want to ship this ever because you can easily just reproduce it. In fact, I'm going to just delete it. And since my package.json has my dependencies in it, which right now is just one dev dependency of NodeMon, since I have that, I can simply run npm install with nothing else. It's going to look at my package.json dependencies and install those, right? So when someone gets your code from GitHub, all they have to do is run npm install, and it looks at the package.json manifest, and then it will install the node modules on their machine. Okay, so hopefully that makes sense. Now, to prevent that from going to your Git repository, you can create what's called a .gitignore file. So we can create a new file called .gitignore, don't forget the dot, and then in that we can just simply put node_modules and save it, and that's it. Now, when we push this to GitHub, that node modules folder won't get pushed. All right, so let's see. The next thing I want to do is use NodeMon. And I mean, you can check the documentation to look at the specifics, but basically all we have to do is, instead of node here in our script, we can run NodeMon and then the file name. So now if we come down here and I run npm start, it's going to run our server on port 8000 just like it has been, but now it's going to constantly watch it, right? So if I come back here, so we have our 500 status and our JSON, but let's change it back to 200. Let's change the content type to text/HTML, and then let's get rid of the JSON stringify and all that stuff, and we can put back h1 hello world. Now normally I would have to restart the server, but if I save, you'll see this kind of refreshes, and I can come back here and reload, and it works. I don't have to go back and keep refreshing. So NodeMon is just one of those tools that I use in just about every Node.js project. Now another thing that I want to show you real quick is the use of a .env file. So environment variables are variables that are in your environment, on your system, and you can access them from your entire program. You can access them from different programming languages is usually a certain way to do it. With Node.js, we have the process object, and on that is an env object with all your environment variables. Well, you can create a .env file and create environment variables in that file, and you used to have to install a package called .env, but now with a recent version of Node.js, you don't have to do that anymore. You can just do it without installing anything. So just to show you, let's create a .env, and you don't usually want to push this, you don't want to include this in your Git repository, because a lot of times you'll have API keys, like maybe you'll have a Google API key, you'll have something here, and you don't want other people to access that or to see that. So what I would do is add that to your .gitignore. So we would just do this, and then that won't be added to your Git repository. So in the .env, let's create a port variable here. So if we want to change the port number, we can just do it from this file. So I'm going to set it to, just to test things out, I'll set it to 8080. And then what we can do is go into our package.json, because you do actually have to run it with a flag, at least for now. So that would be right here where we run NodeMon. We can just do --env-file and then say equals, and then the name of the file, which is .env. So that now when we run npm start, it'll run this command, and it should use that file. So I'm going to save that, and then let's go to our server.js, and instead of hard coding 8000 here, we should be able to access it with process.env, and then anything I put after this env dot, I can access any variables in this file or on my system. So let's say port, and now, let's see, I think we have to manually restart the server. Yep, so now you can see server running on port 8080. So it's looking in this file. Okay, and I could access process.env port in any file in my project. Now I'm going to put that back to 8000 and just restart the server. And now it's back to 8000, but now it's reading it from here. And again, you would put your API keys, things that you want hidden and you don't want in your source, in your repository. Now, another thing that I want to look at is the request object here. Okay, we used a bunch of methods that are on this response object, but there's a bunch of stuff we can get from here. So let's do a console log of, I want to do request.url, and I want to do console log request.method, because those are two very important things that you're going to need. In order to respond correctly. So let's go to the browser and just reload. And then if we look in the console here, you can see we have a slash. So that's going to be the URL because we just went to localhost 8000 and no page after that. And then it's a GET request. If you go to a page on a website, that's always going to be a GET request. You can submit forms as a POST request, or you could make PUT requests and delete requests either from JavaScript using the Fetch API, or from curl, or from a client like Postman, which I'm going to get into. So if I were to go to like localhost 8000/about, it's going to show me the same exact thing because we're not checking the URL. All right, if we look down here now, request.url is going to show /about, but we're still giving the same thing. We're still doing this no matter what method we use and no matter which URL we hit. So that's why Express is so valuable, because you can just do something like this. You can say app.post, so you can do like app.post, so it'll only be for post requests, and then you can do like / whatever users. So that will handle, then you'd have a callback here, and then whatever you put in this function, would only run if you made a post request to /users. Now with just the core HTTP module, we have to manually check everything, the URL and the method. I'm going to show you how to do that, but just know that this stuff is a lot easier with Express. But again, for like the 5th time, I think that it's good to know how this stuff works under the hood. So let's see, what should we do next? Let's make some other types of requests. And I would suggest using Postman. That's the client that I use, but there's all types of clients. You could just use curl if you want, which is a command line utility. You could use like, what are some of the other ones? There's a bunch of extensions for VS Code. I actually have the Postman extension installed. So if I click on this little icon here, I got to sign in. Let's see, this is my workspace.
I have 12 emails, 30 messages, and a proposal due by 10.
How am I already underwater?
I'm in the same boat.
So I would suggest, if you don't have a Postman account, I mean, you can just sign in with Google. I'd suggest doing that because this is really helpful. I can just say new HTTP request, and it'll open up a window here. And now I can make a request to, let's do 8,000. And I'll make a post request. So I'll click post and then send, and you'll see down here in my console, we made a request to /, which is just the root, and it's a post request. And this is how, if you're creating APIs, this is how you would test your routes without having any kind of front end where you would have the Fetch API or Axios or something like that. Routing is also easy with a framework. So let's create just a very simple router. So I'm going to get rid of this, and you can console log the entire request object if you want to see some of the stuff that's on there. I mean, you can get headers that are sent. If you have cookies, you can access cookies and all types of things. So I'm going to get rid of this as well. And let's just have like we'll just create a little router. So we're going to check the URL. So let's say if request.url, if that is equal to just / oops, not /, just /, so that's the route, then let's see, we'll just move this up here. I guess we'll move both of these up here. And let's say, instead of hello world, let's say home page. And this could be JSON. If you're building an API, this could be content type application JSON, and you could serve, JSON objects or arrays, but I'm going to just pretend that this is an HTML server. And then let's say else if, and then we'll check request.url, and we'll do an API after. We'll do some JSON stuff after. So let's say if it's about, then let's see, we'll copy this stuff here, put that in there, and let's do, instead of homepage, we'll say about, and then let's say else, so any other page, then we want it to be not found. So I'll paste this in, and we'll do a 404,